Greetings, everyone. My name is Casey Dodd. I am the principal of Mount Vernon High School. This is my presentation of my year one action research project for IPLI, and the title is If Only There Were 28 Hours in the Day Seeking Balance as a Principal. So where did this actually come from? This is the close as my fourth year as an administrator. I spent the first year as a middle school assistant principal, actually back in a building that I had taught in for several years and where I started my career. At the end of that first year, I was asked to move to become an elementary principal, also within the same district, and I served in that role for 2 years. And at the end of that time, I was then offered the position of high school principal, which I accepted and have been in that role throughout this past year. And I was actually a teacher within this high school building as well. So, in a 4 year period, I've now been in 3 buildings, and I think we can all think back to what our first year was like in any position, whether it was teaching, administration, anything. And that always comes with a lot of opportunities and challenges. And one of the things I've found is that just a really difficult time with finding that balance between my work and my home life. So that led into the purpose of this inquiry, which, those number of hours that I was putting in, the vast amounts of energy, I started finding that it was starting to have a negative impact in several different areas, including my personal health. I wasn't eating as well as I should. I wasn't exercising like I should, and it was putting some strains on my family dynamic, where I just wasn't spending as much time as home with my wife and my 2 daughters, and it was having an impact. So I really wanted to look at this action research to find a way that I could make some changes to balance that work and home life so that I can improve my health, improve the amount of time that I was able to spend with my family, but then also still be able to maintain a high level of performance at work. So really just trying to fulfill all those roles. And that really led into the wondering, what were those changes that I could make in order to balance my work and my home life so that I really could have a positive impact on all of my roles, husband, father, and then also as a role as a building leader. So that led me into figuring out how was I going to do that. And I developed a Google form, which was going to allow me to track these various factors that I began the research project. First, for the health side of it, there was a section in there where I was going to track the number of steps that I was taking on my Fitbit each and every day and recording that. I also wanted to know how was I actually spending my time on each of these days, and it was an extrapolation of what we had done for our mini action research project, because I had found some good data there and decided to expand it out for a grander set of time. And that was going to be how was I spending those number of minutes in those different categories as the day went on. And the different categories I had identified were building management, just those day-to-day operations, making sure the lights are on, everybody's where they're supposed to be, and just the nuts and bolts of what your day looks like. Instructional improvement. So meeting with teachers, the professional development tasks, spending time in classrooms for teacher evaluations, even meeting for case conferences to discuss best things for individual students. Public relations, meeting with parents, any kind of community event that we had, networking events where we were connecting up with community partners, anything along those lines. Student supervision and discipline, so those extracurricular event supervisions coming back for sporting events, concerts, plays, musicals, different things like that, and also all of our favorite, looking into those discipline issues, interviewing students, finding out what the most appropriate steps were going to be, meeting with those students again to make sure that we were following through all of that. And then personal time set aside just for me. Sometimes that was here in the building. I included, like, if I was going to eat lunch on that day, I included that. And then also just anything else I could do, but also outside of school, reading for pleasure, that time that I was going to take for exercising. And then finally, family, that time that is actually dedicated to just spending with my family, making sure that I'm connecting and doing my thing as a father and as a husband. So then, further actions taken. That Google form also included a space to record a quick summary of that day and then any reflections that I felt like might bear noting. And the goal was capture what was that day like, what was going on with it. So looking back, kind of look at that. And that really led into that final question, which was a simple rating for the day. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how did the day go? What was the feeling? And then really trying to take all of those factors into to that. And the intention was to complete this form on a daily basis all the way through the data collection period. And just a quick example of what that Google form looked like, and I just filled it out each day. And you can see where those number of steps and the different number of minutes spent in those different categories, and finally that day rating with the day notes right above it to kind of capture a 1 being absolutely terrible day, 10 being the best day ever. So the data collection process, I really used the first 2 weeks of the data collection period just to gather some baseline data. I wanted to see how many steps was I actually getting in just on a given day without really trying to plan ahead for it. How was I spending my time on a day-to-day basis? And then how was that actually related to the daily rating along with the notes that I was taking? So for analysis that time, I converted all of those recorded minutes into a daily percentage for those activity categories so I could just kind of see how it was broken up. Once I had that baseline data, I then looked at, okay, how can I make some adjustments in my daily schedule based on what I found out to see how can I make those improvements. And that overall goal was to be more conscious of the balancing out the number of minutes spent on work tasks as opposed to the time spent in the personal and family categories, while also trying to make sure I was getting the exercise that I needed, and then tracking that daily rating to see how was it all kind of working together. My data, this is an example of the spreadsheet where all the information from the Google form was dropped. And so I used this. The green represented the first period of it where that was the baseline data. And it worked out really well that I was able to start that right as we finished our first semester. So that I got a good 2 solid weeks at the end of the semester. And then after a break, I was able to come back and start with the beginning of our second semester. And that's where I began the data collection, having time to have looked at and analyzed the baseline to see how I was going to spend my time. Graphs that came out of this. So that daily rating I found very interesting because this was kind of the summation of everything. So you could see that before the break that it was kind of all over the place. But there was, as far as if you were to look at average times, that you saw a lot of 5s, 4s, things like that, and then a few 6s and 7s, and even that 1 8 was on the last day of the quarter. So you can imagine that everybody was in a pretty good mood at that point. Coming back from break, you can see it was fairly erratic. There were some drop downs. What I can kind of say is that overall, you can see there are a lot more 7s, 8s, 9s through there. So there was the impact of all the things that were going on and the positive impacts that were coming out of it. So what was causing all of that? Let's dig into that. The steps taken per day. Here is one thing, is that before break, again, it was fairly erratic, but hovering around that 6,000, 7,000 steps. Some of them were jumping up a little bit, and then some pretty low days. Afterwards, you can see that there were a few low days, but a lot of them were in the 5,000s to 6,000s, on up to that one of the outlier that was the 15,000 day. So overall, again, it was sort of all over the place, but it consistently trying to make sure I was hitting that 6,000, 7,000 step count. I believe my goal at that point was around 7,000 steps. So there were several days I didn't hit it, but was being more conscious of it. The hours of sleep per day. Before break, again, you can see we're sort of hovering around that 6 hours, some lower ones in there. And then after break, again, continuing with that around 6, 7 hours. So there was some improvement, and then still some lower days in there as well. And then the minutes of family time spent. This is probably where I had some much more drastic. You can see that I think I cheated a little bit, that before break, there were some lower minutes than this. I started paying attention to it, got a little more intentional, and you started seeing some higher amounts there. And after the baseline data, once we came back in January, you can see that more consistently there were higher numbers to that, even though that there were some major jumps on some days where there were just flat out 0 minutes spent, or lower minutes than I would have liked. But again, more of a conscious effort to try to plan for that so that you saw some more higher days spent. The personal time, again, really tried to be conscious of how was I spending my day and taking a little bit more time, especially when I was here in the building. I had a really bad habit of not eating anything during the day, which led to then kind of stuffing my face with some unhealthy things towards the end of the day, which compounded problems. So really trying to set aside a little bit of that time. Also, finding a time where if I'd been working on a particular task for a while, taking a 10-minute walk around the building, trying to really just up that amount of time that I was just spending it on something that I particularly wanted to do. The breakdown of the total minutes, uh, you can see across, really what you can see here is that the instructional improvement, I was happy to find that that was actually the highest amount. But then you can go and see that building management, student supervision was taking quite a bit of time. You start looking at that personal and the family minutes being fairly high overall. But what is more interesting is looking at the baseline data as compared to the data after. Now, we have to take into account the scaling of it, just the total number of minutes, because you see that there were just fewer number of minutes in that baseline because it was only 2 weeks versus the January and February. So take that into account. So really just looking at how did those go across. And if you look at the December 2019 and look at the personal and family as compared to all the other categories, you can see how much lower they were. And January, February, how much more balanced that was. So again, trying to intentionally plan those kinds of things to be able to be where I was consciously spending more time trying to find those times for the personal time and the family minutes. So my discoveries coming out of this is one, I found that being more conscious of how I was spending my time after a 2 week study allowed me to be more appropriately to allot my time. So being aware of how my time was spent gave me that starting point. And then looking forward, I need to find ways to be more intentional with the planning of my time. But really, I did find I was able to do it, where by paying attention to a 2 week period, seeing how I was spending my time, and then trying to be really intentional after that, really, really did help. A second discovery, I found that the days that I was not able to get as many steps in, that my daily rating tended to be lower as well. So when you started comparing those days and what the daily rating looked like, and then cross-reference that to the number of steps I was getting, you tended to start seeing that those two were related. So that physical movement seemed to allow me to refocus, be more productive, where it was kind of resetting. Instead of just slogging through a task, if I was able to get up, move around, do something a little bit, and that helped. And just the simple fact of the exercise appeared to impact my rating. Definitely will be looking to include more opportunities for exercise as I plan for next school year, and being conscious of that. Can I give myself a set amount of time for something and then get up, move around if I'm not done with the test so I can refocus and come back to it? And a third discovery, I really found through the analysis of my notes that on the days when I had more interaction with my family, as well as with the students at school and the staff at school, that the daily rating tended to be higher. And it also tended to be that had a lasting impact over the course of the next few days. So those days where looking at my notes that I took, those quick notes, it tended to be where if I mentioned something in there about able to spend more time with my family, or I was able to pop into classrooms, interact with kids, hang out with them in the lunchroom, talk to them in the hallways, it was a pleasant surprise that the rating was actually related to that. And it makes a lot of sense. And it helped justify some of the efforts that I was going into. Is that's why I'm doing this in the first place, is I enjoy being around kids. And really, I'm in education partially because of I think of my own kids and how I like for school to look for them, and I try to be a positive force for that when I'm here. So really, it was great to be able to see that, because it gives me even more of a reason to make that a priority, to get into classrooms, spend more time with students, spend more time with staff, and then also with my own family. So where am I heading next? First of all, that intentional planning. Really looking at how am I spending time both with school activities and at home. So how intentional am I being with that, so that when I'm going to give myself some time for a given task or anything like that, that I'm very intentional about that and how I'm spending my time and my days, so that I can be more effective with it, so that I do free myself up for more time to be able to spend with my family. Finding that time to connect with students, staff, and my family as well. So, because of how much that had impacted my daily rating, which then turned around and just me being more productive, if I rated that as a higher day, I think it's important to be able to find ways to be intentional about that, so that I can build that time in to make sure that I am making those connections. And then how am I going to allow myself to do that? Starting to really look into a little bit of what are the best ways that I can start building some capacity where I can delegate duties off to the different people that are here in the building that can help me with that, so that I can free myself up to be able to then have more time to do some of these tasks that are high leverage and then also have a major impact on my ratings, how I'm spending my minutes, allowing me time with my family, all of that together. And some of that comes from the bibliography. So, you know, the Leading with Passion and Knowledge Principles in Action Researcher was a great resource to be able to really find ways to look at my data and pull some information out of that. And then as I start looking at ways that I can delegate duties off, really digging into that, if you want it done right, you don't have to do it yourself. Um, so all of those things allowing me to look at ways that I can be more productive, more effective as I head into next year. Thank you very much. I hope that you have been able to glean some great information, get some good ideas out of this presentation. I know I was able to get quite a bit out of the process, all the way from coming up with the concept in the first place to collecting the data and then really having to sit and reflect on it. So thank you very much for your time. Be well.